G'day gamers, if you're interested in making a detailed platformer just like this one, within Gamemaker, using drag and drop, then keep watching. G'day gamers. Now we've already done quite a bit of setup with our character. We've set up the movement, we've added collisions, we've added the sprites, and we've changed our character to use states. Now that setup is actually going to start paying dividends for us because we want to add an enemy. And adding an enemy now is actually a lot simpler because we have that setup all done. So let's bring in the sprites for our enemy. Firstly, I want to duplicate the player idle sprite. And we're going to call this s_enemy_idle. Now the sprites are in the description. What we're looking for is the idle strip. Let us drag that over top. Now let's set up the mask for the enemy. I'm going to leave the left at 13. I'm going to put the top at 18 and the right at 34 and the bottom at 62. So it's down at his feet there. Now ensure your origin is set to middle center. And let's duplicate that 2 more times. And we want to call this one s_enemy_walk. And then we need an s_enemy_dead. So let's just group those together down here. So let's just bring the sprites in now for those. So there's a dead sprite, let's drag that in. And for the walk, let's bring that one in as well. Now I'm just going to set the speed of the walk to be 10. And for the dead, I'm going to set that to be 10 as well. And we'll just change the origin here to be 20 and 26. And that way, because this is a line to the left, it'll actually be in the center when we swap to that sprite. So I can close that down. Let's go and create an enemy layer. So just under player, let's make a new layer here. And we'll just call this enemy. So we're just going to make a copy of our player object because we have all the states and everything already set. So it's going to make it much easier to put an enemy in the game. So let's duplicate the player and we'll call it O_enemy. So we want to change the sprite. We'll set it to the idle sprite for the enemy. And we'll also change the masks to be the idle sprite of the enemy. Now I've created a dead sprite, so we actually need a state that is for when the player is dead or the enemy is dead as well. So let's go to our entity and let's make a new variable definition. And it's going to be spr_dead. And for the sprite, I'm just going to put the player's idle because that exists. We don't have a player dead at the moment, so we'll just use the idle. Now let's go back to our enemy. And let's look at our variable definitions, which we inherit from the entity. So the ones here we actually want to change. Actually, just go back to entity and we'll just drag this one up quickly so it's with all the others. And in our enemy, then it'll appear in the right spot. So instead of player idle, let's edit that and we want to have enemy idle. And instead of player walk, we want to have enemy walk. We don't have an air at the moment for the enemy, but instead of player idle for the dead, we want to have enemy dead. So now that we've assigned the sprites to those variables, they will appear when we run the anim script. We don't have to do anything else for that now. Once again, all that setup that we did previously is now going to pay dividends for us. Now we also need to change a state. I'm going to just put the state as enemy state, so es.walk. And for the walk speed, I'm going to set it at 1.2. Now we need to create the enums for the enemy state. Now you could use the same state as the player, but I like to keep them separate so they can have different things. Even though they will have a lot of similar things, I like to actually do it separately. So let's go to our game. I'll make a copy of this, paste it down here, and this is going to be our enemy states. I'm going to call it ES for enemy states And at the moment, we just have an idle, walk, and a dead. So let's go back to our enemy. Okay, so in the step event where we are running those states, let's have a look at this. So we just want to change our case here. Instead of ps.idle, we're going to say es.idle, so standing for enemy states. We have es.walk. And actually, we don't have an air state, so we can delete this one. At the moment, we just have a walk, and I'm probably not even going to use the idle for now, actually. So we're probably just going to focus on the walk. So for the enemy, we're actually not getting input because we're not receiving any keyboard commands. So let's just make it simple, and we'll set a variable instead. Let's set the HSP of the enemy directly, and we'll just set it to walk speed times facing. So if the facing is 1, then we're going to have a HSP of 1.2. If the facing is -1, then it's going to be -1.2. And that'll move us to the left or the right. We don't need our git input. We'll still do calc movement because that will calculate the slowdown as well as the gravity. Now we don't need to check ground because we're not jumping. I'm not going to change states for now, so I'm just going to take the check state out. We're not jumping, so we can take out our check jump, and we're left with our collision and our animation. So this will now enable the enemy to walk left or right, but there's no way for the enemy to turn around at the moment. They'll just hit a wall and they'll just keep walking into it. So when the enemy runs into a wall, the collision script will set the HSP to be 0. But what we want to do is have the enemy change direction when they hit a wall. So we need to add a test that tests to see if our HSP is 0, and if it is, we need to change direction. So let's drag across a check, and we'll say if our HSP is equal to 0, well then we must have hit a wall. So now let's change our direction, and we can do that by assigning the facing value to be a value of facing times -1. And that means that if facing is 1, we're timesing it by -1, so facing will become -1. If facing is -1, it'll then become 1. So essentially, we're changing the direction of the enemy. I have got an idle case here, but I'm actually not going to use that, so I'm going to delete it, and we're just going to leave one walk case for the enemy. Now, because we're using ES as our enum, we need to go into the anim script. And in here, we're referring to the enum PS. So we need an anim script that actually works for our enemy. And it's a really good idea to separate the anim script from the enemy and the player because it gives you more freedom if you need to make changes to their particular animation state. So let's duplicate the anim script. And I'll just call this anim_enemy. And all we need to do here is we don't have an idle state, so we can remove that. And we don't have an air state, so we can remove that. And the constant we're checking this time is es.walk. So now that we have the new anim enemy, we can just go back to our enemy and make sure that we are using that particular script. So here, instead of anim, we just want to have anim enemy. Great. So now let's go and add the enemy to the room. So drag in the enemy. We can place them anywhere here. Let's put them down here so they turn left and right. And if you want to click on the player, because I'm on a different layer at the moment, I can't click on the player, but you can hold down P, or you can press the little button up here, which lets you select from any layer. Then you can select an object from another layer. So let's press run on that now and see what happens. Great. So we have an enemy that moves and they turn when they hit the wall. Now, I'm sure you'll agree there wasn't a lot of setup to get an enemy to do that because we'd already done all the setup before. And it's also really functional because we can add different enemy states. Now, we don't have a way for the enemy to die yet and move into their dead state, but that is something that we can look at adding in a later tutorial. Now, one thing you might notice is that the enemy will start walking the opposite direction to which way they are facing. And that's because HSP is equal to 0 when the enemy is created, so we're instantly swapping their facing direction. So to have more control over which way they're moving, what you could do is if I go back to our enemy, and if you double click on it, and go to the creation code. Now in here, this code will run when that particular enemy gets created. So we can just set a variable here and we can set which way we want facing to be when this character is created. Now it's going to be the opposite to which way you want them to move. So if I put a facing value of 1, it'll start moving to the left. If I put a facing value of -1, it'll move to the right. And that's because if you go back to look at our enemy's code, we are changing it when HSP is 0. So this one's being set to -1, it means it's going to move to the right. So if I place this one here, and then I make a copy of it, copy, paste, and put another one, and I make this one equal with the creation code to 1, and close that. So now this one will move to the left, and this one will move to the right when we run the game. And there we go. So we have no way for them to stop, they just fall off, but that gives you greater control over how they start the game at least. So that's all we're doing for this tutorial, but before I go, I want to mention my Gamemaker course. It's currently the highest rated course on Udemy for Gamemaker. There's a discount coupon code in the description. I suggest you go give it a try. It's a really cool course. You can use the trial version of Gamemaker as well. I make adjustments in the course to allow the trial version to work. So the course is getting some great reviews. If you're interested in looking at Gamemaker a little deeper and start to explore GML, then I suggest you take a look. So thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you next time.